Okay, that first question was a great lead-in. You looked at me 3 times in our last session and said, not yet, but good question. Hold that thought. So, very pleased to be here. I wrote it down because I had no idea what it would be like being up here. But I will just frame the conversation by saying, after the second day, you talked about, you said, you cannot let go of your desires because Source has got hold of them.
And that's thinking in terms of the total you as a we.
I got it. And then you said the worst feeling in the world is to try and let go of your desires because in doing this you disconnect from Source.
Well, when you decide that you're not going to let yourself want something, so you really go to work on not letting yourself want something, you get enough momentum going that with each attempt at that, you do a more effective job of pinching yourself off. But the reason that it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and therefore feels worse and worse and worse is because every time you say, I do not want this thing that I want, the wanting becomes stronger, the desire becomes stronger, the desire takes on more shape, and your inner being focuses upon it proportionate to your attention to it. And so it's really interesting how this thing you have decided not to want, you want more than ever. And when you want something more than ever, your deliberate attempt at not allowing yourself to have it causes a stronger tug of war within you, so your negative emotion becomes more and more discernible and uncomfortable.
Yes. And I went back to my stateroom and I was just contemplating, and I have always thought, and I've seen you a number of times, I don't want to be in the chair. And I thought, well, how do you know you don't want to be in the chair? You've never been in the chair. And so I thought, well, okay, let's get up in the chair and see if I like being in the chair. And that's kind of why I'm here.
It's different than that, though, because you have long wanted to be in the chair. But there have been contradictory thoughts in your vibration that have made you decide that you don't want to be in the chair. What you didn't want is to be foolish in the chair. What you didn't want is to be misunderstood in the chair. What you didn't want was to be unprepared in the chair. What you didn't want to be was misunderstood in the chair. To say I don't want to be in the hot seat is the same thing as saying I don't want an open, clear me to have access to infinite intelligence that is co-creating with me. And there is no part of you that has ever said anything close to that. So fortunately, we know what you mean, not what you temporarily think you mean.
And that's where I got to since the session before we broke to go on land. And now is I got there knowing that. And I just have then one question for you. I have many questions for you, but the one I'll use this opportunity for. So you have exactly honed in on the issue that I really want to talk about, which is, for me, I know between that point of owning a desire and then putting it in the vortex.
But it isn't that you ever do anything to make it cease to exist. It's that you think contradictory thoughts and tune yourself away from it. It is such an important thing to understand that every subject is 2 subjects. So there is the desire for something and then the absence of that desire. And the thing that we really want you to hear, oh, this is such a good time for this conversation, is that the attention to what you think is the opposite of the subject is also attention to the subject. And so the appropriateness of it, the enthusiasm for it, really is understood by your inner being. In other words, there are things that you think that you do not want because of the way that you have been looking at it or because of the way you think others look at it when you look at it. But what we really want you to come to understand is that your inner being has a pure, non-resisted awareness, knowledge, and therefore beingness of everything that matters to you. So it really doesn't matter what game you play where you pretend that you don't want to go there. You've lived so much life where you've wanted to go there and 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 wanted to go there, that you're going to go there. The question is, how much trouble are you going to give yourself along the way to going there? And that's why we talk about the path of least resistance from the framework of human perspective, or the path of most allowance from the framework of source perspective. In other words, it's the same path. The path of most allowance is your inner being knowing what you want and calling you in a non-resistant environment and in a resistance-free environment. But there are two things to consider at all times. How much are you allowing yourself to go in the direction of what you are wanting? And so your inner being, like many parents do with your children, is very adept at knowing so clearly what you want and knowing all of the nuances of the way you think, and knowing not just within your human environment, but within the practiced belief system, thought process of your corrupted, wrong word. Well, that's just the fun word Esther found. Your inner being is calling you, not just through and around the environment that is with you. There's this path and this path and this path, but every path. In other words, you could want to go that way, and a path that way right now might be the path of least resistance. You may very well want to go that way, and that might be the path of least resistance for now, because there are less things for you to trip upon over there than there are over there. But we want to make it very clear that the path of least resistance, or the path of most allowance, is really the pathway whereby fewer of the things that you have picked up along your physical trail you are using to get in your way serve as obstacles to prevent you from going in the direction of what you want. And if you can relax and know that your inner being does not have you on a time schedule. Your inner being feels no impatience when you take the long route, because your inner being is only interested in you getting to where your inner being knows you want to be, and how long it takes and how much divergence there is along the way is not relevant. Isn't that nice? Wouldn't you like to be that kind to yourself? To take shortage consciousness out of the equation? And shortage consciousness is usually about what you think other people are thinking. Where if you are relaxing into what your inner being knows to be, is so interesting, because let's say your inner being knows the path of least resistance to an event or to a subject or to something. And because your inner being knows the path of least resistance, your inner being is calling you to what it knows to be your path of least resistance, the path of most allowance. And as you are called along this path of least resistance, you still, and it's natural because the law of attraction is responding to your active vibrations, as you're called along your path of least resistance, what is the most obvious thing that happens? Your subjects of most resistance, when you're being summoned along a path of least resistance or a path of most allowance, your subjects of most resistance become more evident to you. Now, what's the advantage of that? The advantage of that is once you, in your human form with your conscious mind, discern that you do have some resistance going on about whatever the subject is, and you decide, a new desire comes forth within you. You decide that the most important thing here is for you to release resistance and to allow allowance. Now, maybe for the first time on this subject, you have the opportunity to consciously move in the direction of what you want. You see, your inner being is always calling you, and at what you call the end of this physical lifetime, the path of most allowance will take over, and you'll be right there with all that you have wanted. But don't you think, we do, that it would be a wonderful thing if while you are in this physical body that you could consciously release resistance and consciously and actively be part of the process of determining for yourself and finding for yourself and carving out for yourself and accomplishing for yourself the path of most allowance? Isn't that really what satisfaction is? Isn't that what deliberateness is? So this is our way of saying to you, you're all going to get to everything that you want eventually. And the laws of the universe are going to get you there. But creation by default is far less fun than creation by deliberate intent. And when you get hold of this and you decide that you are going to guide your own thoughts with the intention of the least resistance being active within you, and then you get to feel the glorious, good feeling results of joining the knowledge of your inner being, so that you become a human that flips into the category of following the path of most allowance rather than following the path of least resistance. This is what you're upon. It's one nice thing not to trip over stuff. It's another thing to skip. There's a big difference between just not suffering and just not tripping and skipping. There's a big difference between sort of kind of feeling good and feeling elation. There's a big difference between not suffering and feeling exaltation. There's huge vibrational distance between those vibrations. And none of you intended to put up with the mediocrity of just enduring. We teach joyous survival, not just survival. You're surviving. You're eternal. That's survival with a capital S. You're surviving. The question is, are you joyous in your surviving? In your eternal survival? Yeah. Now, we didn't want to head you off. We just wanted to get out ahead of it first. And we did. So now?
That was my question. My question to you was going to be, other than meditation, obviously, which puts me into alignment with Source, that then manages the path of least resistance.
So we are in agreement that getting out ahead of it is the strongest stance in you getting to control your room, getting out ahead of it.
Yeah. And my question was really about, and I think you have answered it, and I'll have to go and practice what you've just spoken about, but my question was that moment of, and I would put it as, in some ways I've tried to manage my own desires by reining them in, which doesn't work, and I know your teaching is you put your desires and let Source manage them. But was there any insight, which I think you've given me, into that moment when that pattern, I would call it, of thwarting my desires or denying them or very quickly somehow?
Here's the thing, and this is the very powerful and important answer to this really good question. It is a nice thing when you decide to be nicer to yourself, which means don't beat up on yourself with your pattern of negative thought. Be nicer to yourself. Don't beat up on yourself with continuing patterns of resistant thought.